Hello and welcome to today's story behind the song. And today's song is Money, which was the opening track on the album, and it was the third single. It went top 20 in the UK and got us on to Top of the Pops and very much elevated our profile to another level. Now, when we recorded the album, we did the first batch of songs in Los Angeles at Goodnight LA, and Keith Olsen was the producer. Now, the engineer through the whole recording of the album was a guy called Shay Baby, and he played a huge role in the recording of this album. You know, not only was he the guy that got all of the guitar sounds and bass guitar sounds, he was in the control room with me the whole time, doing all the guitar parts, sitting with me while all the guitar solos were being recorded, and also the drum sounds and the bass as well. Keith Olsen was very much the guy behind the arrangements and the vocals in particular, especially arranging backing vocals and keyboards and things like that. He was very much like the overseer of everything. But Shay was the guy who did all the detail. You know, he was there and he played a massive part. Now, once we'd finished what we thought was the album, we came back to the UK and I listened to it and I couldn't help but think that there was still something missing from it. And so I'd continued to write through the whole process, and I'd come up with some other songs. And I managed to convince Rod Smallwood, our manager, that we needed to record 3 more songs. And because Rod was a very powerful and forceful guy, he had an incredible talent for getting his own way, he managed to persuade the record company to pay for 3 more songs. But for those 3 songs, we recorded them in London at Metropolis Studios, which was a phenomenal studio owned by Queen. And only Shay produced these songs. Shay sort of came over and was the producer. Now, there'd always been like a little bit of rivalry between Shay and Keith, and I don't think Keith was too happy that Shay ended up doing part of the album as producer. But, you know, it was just too expensive for us to go back over to Los Angeles. And if my memory serves correct, the relationship between Shay and Keith had broken down. But because Shay was very much a hands-on guy, we chose Shay to produce these songs, which turned out to be a good decision. So in terms of how did the song come about, around that sort of time there was a change of direction within music, and there's some bands that had very much come to the forefront, bands like Rage Against the Machine and Extreme, you know, and obviously Extreme have got one of the greatest guitar players in the world, and he was a huge influence not only on me but thousands of others. Now, within rock music there's a chord which was made famous by Jimi Hendrix on Foxy Lady. And I mean, if you break that chord down, you know, not only does it have a G sharp in it, it has a G in it, which, you know, doesn't sound particularly pleasing to the ear. But when you put an E and a D in there as well, you get this. And that's very much a chord that guitar players go to all of the time as being just something that is the catalyst to a lot of ideas. And Money is very much built upon that sort of funky, groovy feel, inspired by that chord, which has probably inspired a million songs. So I came up with my little riff, which was... And from there, the whole sort of song was built upon. You know, there's another riff in the song later on. Where you hear the kind of Rage Against the Machine influence. Lyrically, you know, I've always kind of followed history, politics, and economics, and that is very much what the song is about. You know, how, you know, wealth distribution, how unfair it is. You know, it's a subject matter which is still probably more relevant today than it was back then. You know, so that's where the you know, you've got that groovy sort of riff, and you've got like that, you know, social narrative that sort of goes on the top, and that is very much you know, the one of the elements that was missing from the album. But the thing that I wanted to talk about, you know, that's the song, but in terms of what can be added to this, in terms of how can I help musicians, you know, and it's very much about the energy that different people bring to a project. You know, so as a human being, I'm quite heavily influenced by the energy that's around me, you know, and probably the biggest mistake one of the mistakes that Skin made, but probably the biggest one, was on our second album. We didn't go back to Keith and Shay, and we decided to go somewhere else, thinking that that same energy or that same chemistry or that same magic could be replicated or reproduced with anyone. And that's not the case. You know, something that I've learned over the years is there's a very special relationship that happens with certain musicians, and it's not only the musicians, it can also be the producers as well, which are the catalyst behind why a record sounds so good. You know, if you go back to like the Motley Crue albums and the Pump album, you know, you have Bob Rock in there with Bruce Fairbairn. You know, so when you happen to stumble across some magic, don't be in a rush to break it up too quickly, because it's very rare that you get those special combinations that come together. So on that first Skin album, you know, without doubt, you know, obviously each one of the musicians played a very big part, but the role of Keith and Shay together brought an element and a dimension to Skin that was never ever replicated again. So that's the only, you know, the sort of add-on message that I can give is, like, if you've got something good, don't be keen to break it up, because you may never get anything as good again. And by the way, this is the guitar that the album was played on, and I would probably say that maybe 85% of all the Skin songs were written on this guitar. It doesn't come out very often now, because it's a bit too rare, a bit too valuable, and I can't really risk it being left behind in some venue. Okay, so hopefully that was enjoyable. Not as long as the other ones. Bye bye.